Welcome to What the Duck, a podcast with real experts talking about direct spend challenges and experiences. And now, here's your host, SourceDay's very own manufacturing maven, Sarah Scudder.
Thanks for joining me for What the Duck, another supply chain podcast brought to you by SourceDay. I'm your host, Sarah Scudder, and this is the podcast for people working in the direct materials part of supply chain. I'm at Sarah Scudder on LinkedIn and at S Scudder on Twitter. If you are new to the show, make sure to follow this podcast so you don't miss any of our direct spend supply chain content. Today I'm going to be joined by Andre Langhorst, and we're going to discuss why you should prioritize building long-term relationships with your suppliers and how to do so. If you work for a manufacturer and are struggling to establish strategic, non-transactional relationships with your suppliers, then this episode is for you. Andre is a software engineer by training. I was told that putting the word software in front of engineer is very important.
That's right.
He loves building things, solving problems, and engaging with customers. He's lived and worked on 3 continents, very broad across many industries. He's a German transplant now on the East Coast. He loves brainstorming and envisioning a better future, talking about value and making customers run better. Favorite part of this is he is a self-proclaimed supply chain nerd, which we're going to dig into in a little bit. Well, welcome to the show, Andre.
Well, hi, Sarah. Excited to be on the podcast, and I think you totally nailed the introduction. I don't know how to improve on that. I really love complex problems. I love the challenge of figuring things out, and I really like to put things in place to kind of solve the problems for me so that I don't have to do it again, because I like to solve it once, not twice.
And it looks like you are quite the artist visionary. I see a whiteboard in the background that looks like it's been put to very good use.
Yeah, that's correct. I like to map everything out on the whiteboard if I can. That behind me is the result of me working with my 8-year-old through his assignments and how much chocolate he earns for how many minutes. And so I think the whiteboards should be everywhere, and I like to put them to use.
So, Andre, I'd like to kick off by having you describe yourself in one sentence.
I think you did that already, right? So I like to solve complex problems and love these mental challenges. So I love to debate a lot, right? And I've been working in the supply chain space for a while. I think one thing that drew me to this area is the complexity of the area, and that's kind of what I work on.
So you're a self-proclaimed supply chain nerd. How did you get this nickname?
Well, it's not a given nickname per se, I'd say. But when I get nicknamed, it's usually like Professor Doctor something, because I like to work on these complicated things. But I'd say that me and my colleagues, we like to call ourselves supply chain nerds, because many of the things that we deal with, and mostly actually our customers deal with, are quite complicated. Quarterly closes can be complicated as well, but amid everything that's going on in this world, delivering on time, in full, with quality, great service to your customers, I think that's quite something. So I want to start off our interview today by going a bit personal. Okay.
As I mentioned, you started as a software engineer doing integrations. So would like to talk a little bit about your career journey.
Right. So like I said, I'm a software engineer by training. So even before I studied, I built systems for discrete manufacturers. They build aluminum profiles. That's what you need when you build a conveyor belt and any kind of infrastructure for factories. And well, then I went to minor and major also in software engineering because that's what I love doing. So no supply chain really yet, right? But then during my studies towards the end, I kind of had to, finance my lifestyle and everything. And I was recruited by a consultancy on campus and started working with various clients from different countries. I got to travel in an airplane as a student, so I really liked the diversity of the job and the people, and kind of learned what makes the world run. And that consultancy was acquired by SAP, and there I quickly discovered that accounting and cost centers and payroll, that's not what's in the stars for me. So instead, there was the time when APSs, right, advanced planning systems, were really maturing as an add-on to your ERP and covering all these broad processes: forecasting, demand planning, production planning, scheduling, materials management, warehousing, S&OP, inbound, outbound, our space basically. So it was all new for me, and this really drew me in. So my very first project was kind of the only one at the intersection, let's say, of software engineering and supply chain. I helped a life sciences company build a hardware, software, kind of IoT before IoT existed project that would enable their clients to, their clients are research centers, and it's basically like a freezer on site that is managed remotely. So that was kind of the first supply chain project. And as I mentioned, initially I got advanced planning systems were really getting mature and on the rise. So I started my career actually as a management consultant. So I would go and visit the clients and walk the shop floors, understand the processes and challenges, and kind of, see the physical manifestations of too much inventory, right? You see it kind of, you see it there, right? And backlog, too much backlog, you can kind of see these things. And then we would try to figure out how to improve these processes with software. So part of my early career was translating between the customer, right, and what they kind of wanted to achieve and the issues, and then the technical engineers that kind of had the answers to the what and the how. So that's what I started with.
I have to ask, what was the most shocking thing you saw when you were doing visits on the production floors? What stands out as like the wow?
Yeah, so that's actually at the intersection of sales, engineering, and production, right? And it was a very interesting client, and they had a very motivated sales group. And the sales sales guys, of course, they want to do everything for their clients, right? So they called all the time to the production floor, try to discuss changes, engineering changes for the clients. So what would happen that the best salesmen managed to make the production managers remove parts from almost finished products from other customers, and then they were repurposed for their own clients. So that was quite interesting. And of course, what was the root cause? The root cause was too much backlog. So they had been getting all the orders in, give it all to us, we want to book all this, bookings. So they kind of lost insight into what's really going on operationally. And when you're in such a situation, you only have really one thing that you can do. You need to successively remove backlog and get through this and not steal parts for other customers. So that was a good question. That was quite an experience, and I would never imagine that big, important machines get built that way.
I'm not sure what I would have said when I saw that happening.
Yeah. So that was kind of at the beginning of my career, like, translating between these requirements. And then over time, I got more into the supply chain strategy component, right? And at that time, it wasn't really common, and I became an evangelist for it, was installing a dedicated supply chain organization, right? Now we all know chief supply chain officers, but at that time it wasn't common. With supply chain balanced scorecards and as a cross function between all these engineering, sales, production, sourcing, logistics, and service, right? So that's kind of what I did then in the middle of the career, and that brought me to all kinds of wild places between the frozen rivers in Siberia and the beaches in Rio de Janeiro and the desert in Dubai and the wind in Calgary. So that kind of carried me for a while over the globe, and was interesting to get exposure to many different industries and clients and see how they approach problems. And there's things you don't even know these problems exist. If you're in the middle of the rainforest for an oil and gas exploration companies, talking about materials management is an entirely different challenge, because you got to fly in the stuff with a helicopter, and so very interesting. And then 17-ish, I returned to the US for a second time, and then to beautiful Pennsylvania here, and that was when I joined the Direct Materials Group back then in Ariba, which now is become the SAP Business Network, right, or provide the foundation for it. And I've since then focused more, let's say, on the value part of things. What should you really prioritize? With all these many things that you can do, what should you actually do? What should you actually start with? And because you cannot do everything. And for every customer it has their individual challenges, and so you need to find a good solution for every situation.
So one of the reasons why I was interested in having you come on the show is, one, you've got a very heavy manufacturing background, but your focus has really been, at least for the last few years, in the direct materials, direct spend space. What would you say is new with the direct materials procurement now, meaning in 2022, that was not a thing in previous years?
Yeah, I mean, the year is almost in the books, right? So I'll basically say what's in store for 2023, right? And so from, let's say, previous years, 2020, we all discovered that we're all in a globally networked supply chain, right? A network of supply chains. And we all discovered that over 3 decades, we have built a network of supply chains that may not be as dependable as we thought they were, right? So we had the Suez Canal, we had obviously COVID with all these changes. We had all kinds of weather impacts. And what has happened and that has been a trend that has been going on for decades, is that uncertainty increased. So there's some measures of uncertainty. Actually, you can measure uncertainty. So these have steadily increased. What has decreased are global inventories. It's part kind of also my fault, because, advanced planning solutions, you optimize inventories. But what if your assumption regarding the probability of something going really, really wrong is not correct? Usually you don't factor that in. So, and that's what we've kind of seen from 2020 to now-ish, right? And now I think we're getting into a new phase. We've had inflation now for a while as well. So we will see different aspects of the global bullwhip in the next year. So semiconductor is already in a different cycle. Is already you're seeing increased capacities that will then swing back to automotive, right? That will then impact prices, and so for logistics, same thing. We have been through all these different cycles of logistics, and now we see additional capacity in logistics. Global shipping has kind of relaxed, and so why I think this is like a continuation, but we're just seeing a different side of the coin. So the thing that has changed now is that we got smarter a little bit, right? So we kind of figured out, so we cannot depend on all these things anymore. So resiliency is now something we need to look at. So for, 10, 20 years, if you look at CPO priorities, supply chain resilience, it wasn't even there in the top 10. And now it's top 1 and top 2. So now we kind of figured out that we need to do something there, but also we don't want to waste our resources. We want to do that more efficient. So now we're through the initial shock of things are not as stable as we thought, and we're putting these things in place to get a better handle on all these uncertainties. And now we can actually go back and look at, okay, how do we do this more efficiently? Before we were like firefighting and trying to fix this and fix that. Oops, find a new supplier there. And now I think we're getting into, let's say, stable, unstable situation, right? We're trying to create a pocket of stability on top of all these instabilities. So I think that's what's changing. We're getting into a new phase and also getting kind of new solutions in place, because we're learning to deal with this uncertainty.
Yeah, when you and I were prepping for our interview today, I think supplier collaboration came up quite a bit in our conversation.
Right.
So why is this so important, and what does it mean to you? When I say supplier collaboration, how do you describe what that means?
Okay. So you have all this uncertainty, and then let's say your engineering department tells you to find a new source of supply, right? That's a new supplier. That means it's an untested relationship in all aspects. It's an untested relationship in terms of, how do we understand each other when we say, we confirm something, right? How are they being on time? What is their understanding of quality? It's all untested. So what do? Well, you have to collaborate, and you have to try to do this proactively. You have to try to share planning information. You have to try to, get a common understanding of the execution, right? You have to create visibility. You have to have processes in place where you can quickly react to quality deviations, right? This is yellow. Every other day it was white. What does it mean? Okay, so figuring these kind of things takes days and weeks and months, right? So you're trying to make this more efficient. So I think that is why supplier collaboration is critical for once, because we're now dealing with untested relationships in many cases where we need to be flexible. We have certain shortages in certain areas. We need to be flexible, re-engineer things, and then we kind of the only fix is collaboration. And then you mentioned bullwhip before. There's only 2 fixes to bullwhip.
Will you describe for our listeners what you mean by that? Let's start.
Okay, yeah. So bullwhip effect, very simply is everyone has experienced it in a car, right? There's a traffic jam, and then the whole traffic stops, and it may stop completely, and then suddenly everyone goes full speed again, and then again stops, and so that's kind of the bullwhip effect. Even though everyone could drive perfectly safe and be happy, let's say at 10 miles per hour, we're not doing it because we're humans, we're impatient, we want to go because, look, it looks clear, let's go, right? So it's a human behavior. There's certain effects, of course, that like the Forrester effect and these things that promotions can affect bullwhip effect. So there's certain effects on bullwhip that make it worse and create it. But the two key things is insight. So if you know everything at any given time, you don't have bullwhip because you know everything and there's no delays. But in reality, there's delays. So the time between the supplier thought about canceling your order and you receiving it, that's a delay. That's time that you can put to use in order to find some new supplier or maybe renegotiate or whatever. But that time is lost if that delay is long. And that creates, oh my God, now we need to act and fast, right? So you accelerate and then you get to stop again. So that's the bullwhip effect. That's and the more supply chain layers we have, the more this bullwhip effect is amplified. So with all these global supply chains, this is why we're seeing all these logistical challenges. So that's the bullwhip effect. And the only solve is insight, visibility, and digitization, which enables collaboration and speed, right? So if you're faster, and if you have a better insight, an accurate insight into what the situation actually is, you can mitigate the bullwhip effect. And this is all collaboration. So my whole mantra is collaboration, 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 everything you can collaborate.
So, question I have for you around that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's make it more specific, actually. I think a good example that just came to my mind is pharma companies. So many pharma companies utilize CMOs, right? Contract manufacturing organizations, right? They basically outsource certain aspects of the production cycle. Involving the key ingredients, but also packaging, and this is a trend that's not going to revert. It's a trend that's actually still intact. It may shift between different regions, right? Because we have now had a very strong dependence on China, for example. So it may shift, but that trend is not going away because we're all looking for efficiency. So now, how can you be a good buyer? And how can you have a good relationship with your supplier? So I can tell you how you can be a terrible buyer. So you give them really bad data and you change it around all the time. So how can they plan with that? They can't. So what will they do, right? All these things have impacts. So if the supplier notices that the data you give them is bad or changes all the time in unpredictable ways, they will make their own conclusions. You will pay a higher price. You will get worse terms, So do the other thing. Be a good buyer, share all this information and try to be accurate. Of course things change, but try to make reasonable changes. And then what happens, you get a win-win situation. You get a situation where suddenly, like in this case, the pharmaceutical companies, that may the CMO, they may have a reserved production line there, and just because you're sharing information, they can squeeze in some orders from some other client. They make more money. They're happy. They give you better conditions. So that's win-win. Supplier dealing with suppliers doesn't need to be win-loss, right? It doesn't need to be trade-off. So there's a lot of win-win to be discovered, and unfortunately, it's not always done.
So you mentioned a great pharma example, and you talked about what a buyer can do to better collaborate with the suppliers. I would argue, though, in many organizations, it needs to be more culturally driven from the top down. So what can a leader do who has a team of buyers or a team of people on her or his procurement team do to set up processes and systems to enable their teams to better collaborate with suppliers. I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. So I think there's two answers probably, at least. I think one is strategic. I mean, set up the objectives in a certain way for your teams in terms of balanced scorecard. Just if you have purely KPIs, right? Of course, your team will hit them, but nothing else. So think in terms of a more balanced scorecard and of a more balanced KPIs that also consider the supplier and win-win.
And what do you mean by scorecard and KPI?
Yeah, like so if you're in a sales organization, you want to sell, right? You basically what you set up is a sales target, and then they will run and make it happen, right? But if you have different things you want to achieve at the same time, you need basically a more balanced approach where you have different metrics by which you measure your success, and not everything will be then sales. It will be different objectives, like how happy the supplier is with you, right? It can be something entirely qualitative, for example. And so adding these different dimensions to the overall performance, that will make one thing happen. That will provide orientation, but that doesn't mean that your team can actually do it. So the other thing is you need to remove roadblocks, and that's your systems, right? That's where you and me, we come into play, and we need to provide a system that takes away the roadblocks and automates everything as possible, digitize as much as possible, provides a user interface that is easy to consume and is responsive. So that's the other thing. They don't have time. Right, so usually, if they, everyone is trying to do the right thing usually, but often you're so, dealing with all these global changes. You're trying to react all to these changes. You're already in complete cognitive overload, and then you simply don't have time. So you need to create space. You need to create this room for improvement. And then the things you can steer with the KPIs, with the scorecards, can actually happen. So you need the objectives, but also you need to actually make your team enable them to do it, because they may not actually have the time to do it. Remove all wasteful activities. Remove things that are not necessary. Approval steps that can be maybe automated. There's so many things you can do in terms of efficiency. Yeah, but definitely digitization is a big one there.
Yeah, I would also argue another important part of the supplier collaboration process is also making sure you have alternative suppliers in place and that you're nurturing those relationships. The last thing you want to have happen is you're waiting for your parts to arrive. They're supposed to be here tomorrow. You find out it's going to be 3 weeks. You don't have an alternative supplier in place. You're scrambling last minute. And if you don't have somebody that you can call or contact, it makes that process much, much harder.
Exactly right. And then maybe you have to steal parts.
Yeah, then your sales team's on the floor stealing parts from other customer orders.
That's firefighting, then you're just trying to survive. So you're exactly right.
Do you have any examples of customers that you've worked with that you can share that have done a really good job of transforming from more transactional supplier relationships to more collaborative and strategic?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of them. I will stay in industry terms anonymized because I didn't get the approval in advance. But so there's some life science and CPG customers that wanted to effectively, supplier. And when you have supplier management inventories, you can do two things. You can basically get the supplies off your books, right? this is kind of, let's say, the accounting trick, and makes you look more efficient, and then also the management aspect of it. So there's lots of customers that I work with that transitioned this operational aspect of, having to restock them and having to manage these inventories on site for a buyer, right? Let's say in a warehouse in a certain site, they manage the suppliers over there for the buyer. Where we've seen that actually the supplier can do it much more efficiently if they have an understanding of, like you said, are you gonna stick to the agreement? Are you gonna really stay within the boundaries that we agreed to? And I've also seen this not work out, where actually buyers asked us to, you know what, I cannot try my suppliers, even though we have the thresholds defined, the min and maxes and everything, and the restocking and so on. It's not accurate. They don't stick to the agreement. So I need additional information so that they need to put in to get more information. So I've seen both things, and it really depends on the industry. But in the SMI area, there's definitely some quick wins. Where suppliers sometimes can do a better job at managing suppliers. And there's probably other examples.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that you brought up when we were prepping for our conversation was around what you are calling a talent crisis in supply chain. This has not been discussed what I would call very much. I mean, sure, you read about it and it comes up, but I don't see it being like some massive topic of conversation and priority. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Pretty much every customer I talk to is affected by this. Be it in logistics, be it, let's say, more operative functions like even truck drivers, right? But definitely in the factories, there is not a very strong bench of talent that then they can utilize, and also the requirements seem to be higher towards what employees expect. And in a very strong labor market that we have right now, at least in the US, you have options, and then suddenly people leave because
you mean like gyms and massages and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I used to live in the Bay Area, so I'm used to some
like kombucha and we don't have these things on the East Coast. We get like water, maybe sparkling, but that's it. And but I think it's even more basic things, like just the pure workload can burn you out. Just dealing with things can like be a very taxing, be very taxing, and then all the jobs involve technology at a certain rate. So the very simple jobs, they're increasingly replaced by robots and automation. But most of the jobs now, even on a basic level, involve a certain amount of technology, at least at this time. And those are not so easy to replenish. You need training. You have standard operation procedures, and you have all kinds of machinery. I don't know why it's not discussed. I have been hearing quite a lot about this. Quite many references to. There were some terms like labor, the workforce crisis, and I don't have an answer as to why it's not being discussed, but it's real. It's real.
Then to piggyback on that, And again, this podcast is focused on people and direct materials, which I know that there's a talent shortage there. How do we solve this crisis?
Well, one thing I think that you're doing that I really like is get more women into the field of supply chain. I myself coached a young talent. She studied, studied actually supply chain. You can study this nowadays, and I think, that the field needs to present itself as a less, as a more attractive field, and. So I think that's one thing. Really tapping into the whole workforce, women, men, whatever. That really is one thing, and what I said before. Really making the processes efficient and not wasteful. You studied at a university for how many years and paid a lot of money. And then you're working on, reformatting some Excel files. That is not, that's not what people want, right? They want to have an impact, and they want to see how they can, maybe at scale improve the world, but even in the smaller scale, make things work. And so I think we need to make sure that we provide impactful jobs. That we identify when jobs are not impactful and just serve a system, an internal system that we can maybe reduce. And that's one of our board members calls this zombie killing, right? So when you have these zombie processes that you really shouldn't have them, identify them, kill them, because they're just creating unhappiness, and there's nothing good coming out of them. So, I think those will be some general guidelines. Identify these things that don't really have an impact and don't really have an outcome, and just make it a more open and attractive field to work in.
For those who are listening that are wanting to upscale their procurement teams and hire buyers and leaders in the direct space that are going to have better skills to collaborate with their suppliers, what do you think are important things to look for when hiring new people?
I already said that technology is not it's not going away. So you need to be adept and apt at utilizing various, elements of technology, right? Do you need to be a data scientist? No, probably not. But you need to be flexible in terms of ways of working. So I would definitely look in terms of cognitive flexibility. I would look at how well you are able to put tools, let's say tools on a very high level, make them do the work for you. So what's next, what's coming is obviously, it has been in the news over a couple of weeks, what's coming now for real seems to be AI. And that will have an impact on procurement and supply chain as well. That means lesser tasks that you really don't want to do, like simple supplier management tasks. Those will be potentials. Those will be the first potentials to be realized.
Like massive emails overload from suppliers.
That's the actuality, right? That's current. Those are things that AI will be able to help us with, and I think that is a short-term development that's over the next 1-2 years. So think of all of this going away. What do you do then? Well, obviously you focus on the more value adding activities like actual supplier management. Actually meeting with your suppliers, actually, talking about their products, their developments, all that is time that we don't have. We don't have time for this today, but this is what we really should be doing. Really understanding them, really understanding the products they're building and the value they could be adding to our products, what's up in their pipeline, more strategic topics. So I think this is going to continue to that the more clerical activities will be increasingly automated, and that you will actually be in need of people skills again and talking to these people for real, and not about where's my order, not about did you send it, but actually well, let's look at your products and let's look at maybe different formulations, and let's look maybe at material trends in terms of new opportunities, things that we could benefit from as a buyer, or and you could use in your production process as a supplier. So I think that's what you should look for. People skills and technology skills in the sense of being able to utilize technology effectively.
Thanks for discussing why you should prioritize building long-term relationships with your suppliers today, Andre. And I also want to highlight, we talked about not only why, but how to do so. If you have anything you'd like to promote or a project you want our audience to know about, now's the time. So where would you like to send people if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, if you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't want to promote anything, obviously. I'm looking to put the business network in place to solve problems around purchase order collaboration, planning collaboration, all these things that I that I mentioned before. So yeah, we can reach me on LinkedIn. I think we, as a practice globally, we can learn so much from each other, and I really enjoyed the exchange.
If you missed anything, you can check out the show notes. You can find us by typing in What the Duck, another supply chain podcast in Google. To have the optimal search results, make sure to add another supply chain podcast. To ensure you don't miss a single episode, make sure to follow this podcast and subscribe to us on YouTube. If you are new to the show, make sure to follow this podcast so you don't miss any of our direct materials supply chain content. I'm at Sarah Scudder on LinkedIn and at S Scudder on Twitter. This brings us to the end of another episode of What the Duck, another supply chain podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Scudder, and we'll be back next week.